It's an awful news day. It really is. And I think a lot of people will be waking up this morning almost trying to compute everything that's going on, whether it's the crash, what's happening in Iran. We'll come to the crash in a moment, but let's start with Iran. And we should probably start with Sir Keir Starmer's comments. The Prime Minister has spoken this morning. And he says, the reports of these strikes are concerning and we urge all parties to step back and reduce tensions urgently. Escalation serves no one in the region. Stability in the Middle East must be the priority and we are engaging partners to de-escalate. Now is the time for restraint, calm and a return to diplomacy. Salma, we've always known that part of the world, Middle East, has always been unstable. Iran particularly volatile in their history for the last 50 years, since the revolution. And what's happening at the moment in the Middle East in Gaza is worrying enough. This is, I don't know how you look at it, this is a significant escalation, isn't it? The fact that Israel have chosen unilaterally to attack Iran, rightly or wrongly, it's a big moment in the Middle East.
It's a huge moment in the Middle East, and the thing that's concerning about it is once the conflict in Gaza began, the diplomatic community internationally was always worried about this having a larger scale impact in the region. And, you know, not only is it about instability in the Middle East, it's what that instability means. And you will see today, if anybody is following the markets or trying to understand what's happening with oil prices, they've skyrocketed. So this is not just about a conflict. Yeah, already. There's not just about a conflict in the Middle East. The repercussions of this will be felt economically across the world because of the potential of the retaliation of Iran to close sea routes that move lots of cargo around, particularly oil. So I think, you know, not wanting to take away from the security aspect of this, the potential human conflict and damage, but also the economic impact that this is going to have the world over.
So we will feel it here in the UK. I mean, we were hearing from Trent Murray earlier on, who's in Tel Aviv, saying, that correspondent in Tel Aviv, saying that, you know, schools are being closed in Israel, people are warned not to go too far from bomb shelters, opening underground car parks, and that, in fact, the IDF, Israeli Defence Force, have said that there are some 100 drones being reported heading for Israel. Horrific for those who lost their life in Iran, horrific for those in Israel, and Israel is in the middle of wars on all fronts.
Yeah, I mean, fighting on every front. Don't forget, obviously, as well as what's been going on in relation to Gaza, there's been, obviously, conflict with Lebanon as well, and Israel trying to sort of stem Hezbollah's influence there. Hezbollah, who's supported by Iran. But I think in the last few days, I mean, only yesterday lunchtime, the United Nations watchdog, nuclear watchdog, had issued a warning that Iran was not complying with obligations around openness and transparency about its uranium enrichment programme. And also live at the moment, well, still live, has been negotiations between America and Iran around trying to, again, get to a point where we can trust that Iran's not developing a programme. And, of course, Israel has, on the back of maybe yesterday's United Nations watchdog saying what it did, decided to take retaliatory actions. Now, that is a big issue because America has said to Israel, do not take action on your own, and it will bring into question how much Trump is confident about his relationship with Netanyahu in terms of working together.
I mean, just looking, Caroline, at some of the language, you know, Netanyahu's using, he says it was a preemptive strike, and the core of it, you were saying there, for people that perhaps don't know, is around the concern for nuclear weaponry in Iran. That's the core, isn't it? And then he goes on to say, for as many days as it takes to remove this threat, we will continue. As you said, America has made it clear that you're on your own in this, Israel. What would be the political thinking on that? That it doesn't want to be involved, or that it's got negotiations going on both sides, or because that could be interpreted as a green light for Netanyahu, or you're literally on your own, we're not backing this?
I think, you know, on a positive, there can be a positive.
Yes.
I think the fact that America's come out and said, we did not know about this,
right.
We do not think it's right, we are in the midst of live negotiations, is an attempt, I'm sure, by America, and it will be by other countries as well, including Keir Starmer, to de-escalate the situation.
I think President Trump is actually saying he was aware this strike was going to happen, but America had no part to play in it. That's what he's saying. So,
well,
and they did evacuate their embassies in Baghdad, so they knew something was about to happen.
They may have known that, so they were concerned about what was happening, given what happened. But I think at the moment they were in live discussions, so I think there's no conspiracy theory as yet here.
Sure. But the other significant thing here, yes, absolutely, you know, Iran's an authoritarian regime and the threat of the nuclear threat is real. But I think the difference here, and I think if you speak to people in Iran, and British Iranians waking up this morning will haven't experienced in probably the 80s, is the potential death of civilians and people and personnel being targeted. Now, if they've attacked, let's say, nuclear scientists or the head of Revolutionary Guard, where was this person? Was he asleep in his home? Who else has been killed in that in that blast? You know, have they been precise enough? And this is the worry that I think that if civilians have been killed in this, then Iran probably feels they do need to act because there'll be lots of pressure from the people in Iran, and that's the worry about how escalation can then continue.
Yeah. Look, Iran's got its own unique issues as well. I mean, there are a lot of people within Iran who dislike the regime, dislike the theocracy that's there. So
and British Iranians as well.
And British Iranians who probably, many of whom escaped during the 80s, that came here. However, this
we may get more who want to escape now.
Indeed.
And we need to be ready for that when you talk about the refugee crisis.
And there is going to be a question around that in terms of immigration and who you might want to allow to come into this country or other Western European countries. But I think the issue here now is really understanding where is there any room for diplomatic negotiation, because the UK has had very little traction as far as Iran is concerned. I mean, they've always described us as the Great Satan. The UK has had little traction as far as Israel is concerned. So the America question becomes so much more pertinent.
Right.
And if Donald Trump decides to take a particular side, if he decides that he wants to intervene, or if he decides that America is going to retreat from this situation, then I'm afraid I think escalation is an inevitability. So we have to be very careful about who we're playing in and how, and making sure that actually that diplomatic process takes its course.
I mean, it is frightening, isn't it? If you look at it on paper, we know about Iran, an authoritarian regime, and whether we like it or not, the fact is that Benjamin Netanyahu, his country, is accused of a genocide at the moment. They've not been proven in a court, but these are serious allegations. These are two countries with a really terrible recent track record going at war against each other. We know that Netanyahu this week is facing corruption charges. You've got to ask, is this another way of deflecting and protecting his own political fight? But what happens on either side is people lose their lives.
Yeah, of course, but let's not forget, Adil, that Iran has been behind supporting terrorist activity around the world, and there is no doubt that the links between the Iranian administration and Hezbollah in Lebanon is real, and they don't stop themselves at issuing drone strikes on Israel that affect civilians too. Look, Netanyahu, there's a whole bundle of issues that you've just sort of summarised there around questions about his corruption, about the way he's done things. A parliamentary committee in Israel has said they want to investigate how, in fact, Israel was defenceless, if you like, when the attack was made in October that lost something like 1,200 lives in one day and many hostages taken. And all of that's put to be in one side while the conflict with Gaza is going on. And now we have another situation in relation to a retaliation, if you like, Israel would see it, against a potential development of the nuclear programme in Iran. It is very, as Salma said, it's incredibly destabilising. We may think that these issues do not affect us, they are far away, but there are ripples from this that reach out across the world and reach to us, whether it's people fleeing for their lives because of this conflict, whether it's in the markets with oil, obviously, and fuel. That's an important part of the Middle East and how it affects our global economy. But it's worrying. And worrying as well is what is actually going on in Iran in terms of its nuclear development and programme. That is a big worry for all of us.
So remind people that don't know, before we move on to other things, what is the rule about Iran and nuclear weapons? They're not meant to have them?
So back in 2015, actually President Obama actually did strike a deal with Iran around that it was only producing uranium for its nuclear power. Right. And it wasn't going to be developed into a weaponised technology. And in response for that treaty, he sought to say, well, look, we'll lift sanctions if you have openness and transparency about that. Iran's not the only country in the world, let's be honest about this, where this is discussions with other countries as well. So they're not alone in this. This is an ongoing, if you like, diplomatic engagement with other countries. North Korea is another one we might be worried about as well. So that's happened, but it's always been a very, very fragile situation of having that openness and transparency, and hence, obviously, the UN watchdog on Thursday probably not helped, that's the wrong word to use, but it opened up.
They declared that they hadn't been open and transparent about what the materials are, which is almost saying they're not complying, isn't it, without actually stating it as...
Yes, they're essentially saying they've breached the treaty agreement.
Yeah.
And, you know, there have been attempts by the French and the Americans to try and bring Iran into the tent that has been resisted. You know, and many people will argue in Iran's favour that they are perfectly entitled to have uranium for energy supply reasons, but that's entirely the point, that turning it into nuclear weaponry is the thing that's the issue.
And the watchdog said this was first time in 20 years that had happened, you know, since the 2015 agreement and deal that you mentioned there. You mentioned the implications on, you know, the markets and finances and general world stability. I mean, it was only a few weeks ago in May, wasn't it, that there were accusations that the Israeli embassy in London was one of those targeted when 5 Iranian men were arrested on suspicion of preparing an act of terrorism. So there's also the wider fallout, you know, for countries around the world, including us here, of an escalation of that.
Yeah, there will be, certainly. The security services today will be looking at various communities, various actors, and trying to understand whether there are any moves in those networks as to whether there'll be violence on streets or protests or on streets as well in other countries outside of the two states that are engaged in conflict. I think we have to remember that it's not for the UK to take sides in this issue. It is for the UK to use all of its diplomatic might to bring this to a swift resolution.
And get talking. I mean, this happened at about 1 o'clock British time in the morning, which is why it's not featured in any of the newspapers, because we're talking about it because we are on television in the position of. But I mean, the extraordinary front pages is what everybody would be fearful that we will be speaking about this morning, and that air crash, Air India crash, which killed 241 people, including 52 Britons. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has confirmed an investigation team from the UK has been sent to help authorities in India as they try to piece together what went so catastrophically wrong.
Yeah, and joining us now is aviation analyst Alex Macheras. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. I mean, these pictures, and this is in the world of social media now, so many of us saw these pictures before we knew anything else. They popped up onto our TikToks and onto our Instagram accounts, and they were simply devastating. We can see that the plane crashed within 30 seconds of taking off from Ahmedabad Airport. From your experience, and you have analysed many of these crashes over the years, and you work very closely within the airline industry, what do you think went wrong here?
Good morning, guys. You know, I think the first thing to remember is that typically in something as awful as this, with something as awful outcome as this, it tends to be a chain, a sequence of events, one that builds upon the other, that then actually leads to that final outcome, rather than, oh, it's clearly A, B, or C. It would most likely be several factors coming together to ultimately lead to that awful, devastating outcome of this massive long-haul 787 Dreamliner, which is in service everywhere, ultimately struggling to gain altitude. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at an aircraft that had taken off bound for London Gatwick and then struggled to gain height. And the investigation will focus on why it struggled to gain height, because as the pilots declared Mayday and informed air traffic control that they were struggling, they said, quote, no thrust and no lift, basically no power, and therefore the aircraft struggling to gain height, it starts to come down. And of course, coming down in a densely populated area and part of the city was only going to worsen things. So it's one of the worst air travel disasters in recent modern aviation history. And that is because, thankfully, air travel around the world is so safe, and so is so rare for us to see something like this for an aircraft with a proven safety record.
I mean, when you look at some of those images, and of course, the first thing you think of is the human cost, and we'll talk a little bit about the extraordinary miracle survivor as well in a moment, and what you can tell us about how that might have happened. But when you look at some of those images, you can see the plane still has, and we've just moved on to something else, but we can see the plane has the wheels still down, the landing craft. And that is something that wouldn't be the case in a normal situation, would it? Immediately, those wheels go up. And there's also been talk about the angle of the flaps on the wings. So did that give you any clue to what happened? Was it because they thought, well, keep the landing gear down because we're going down and then we might have a chance to land safely? Or was there some other fault potentially going on, Alex, from your experience?
Well, I think that the part that is key, actually, in all of this is the fact that the pilots were aware that something was fundamentally wrong. So just seconds after the aircraft had taken off and was struggling to gain height, the pilots were obviously aware that with the inputs they were attempting or whatever they were seeing in the flight deck was enough for them to inform air traffic control of that Mayday, the distress call, essentially, in aviation. Now, why the aircraft was struggling to gain height is, of course, at the moment, the great unknown. You know, why was the landing gear not retracted, as you correctly said, Kate, as it would be routine after takeoff? And of course, there are, as you say, there are reports based on the footage, although I will stress that the footage continues to be quite grainy, as to whether or not the wings and the flaps were set correctly for takeoff, where the flaps would be extended slightly in order to help generate lift and then later retracted. The footage is a bit grainy to take a full conclusion from that. But yes, there are concerns as to the way in which this aircraft appeared to have been configured just for a takeoff, unlike others. Now, why? Was it because the aircraft was struggling to do so? Was it pilot error? As I say, that's the part that now the investigation has to focus on. And Boeing, who make this aircraft, will really want quick answers, if only to rule themselves out, because this aircraft, the 787 Dreamliner, is in service all over the world. There are over 1,000 of them. And that's the concern.
Alex, that leads me to my final question to you, actually. There'll be people watching this morning who've got holidays booked, and it's a natural instinct, I think. A lot of us think about it straight away, going, oh, my gosh, I'm getting on a plane soon. Should I get on that plane? It might well be a Dreamliner if you're doing a long distance. What would you say to people at home that are worried about flight travel this morning, maybe even getting that same route? They might be booked on that same route again very soon. A lot of British Gujaratis may have plans to go there for weddings or whatever. What would you say to people who are a bit worried this morning?
First things first, I would say, look, I get it. You know, it's when we see something as horrific as this and it goes everywhere, it sparks concern. But it sparks concern and it does go everywhere because, thankfully, it is so rare. And that's why we talk about it. That's why it's such big news. You know, daily, over 120,000 flights are moving about all around the world. And thankfully, the overwhelming majority, if not almost 100%, are absolutely fine because air travel is categorically the safest form of transport. Investigators will be doing what they can. We'll have answers over the coming days and weeks to ensure that there isn't something else at play here. But for now, everyone should continue to have that full trust in air travel.
OK.
And for those that live under flight paths, I mean, one of the horrors that we haven't even really got a clear picture on is the devastation on the ground, coming into land as it did, or crash. And then we saw that huge plume of smoke very close to a hospital, to a place where accommodation for medical students. I mean, the devastation is horrific. And people were thinking, well, gosh, in such a densely populated area, it'll raise those questions again, won't it, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, these are the nature of airports. Airports are in and around cities, and so unfortunately, when something goes as awfully wrong as this, it worsens that. We just have to be thankful at how rare it is. And for the aircraft involved, the Dreamliner, the 787, has never been involved in a fatal accident anywhere in the 15 years of it flying commercially. That aircraft type flies 500,000 passengers a day and has done so since it entered service 15 years ago. So when you look at the numbers, it doesn't diminish how awful what happened yesterday and everything there. When you look at the numbers, it does hopefully put ease to those concerns.
Okay. Alex,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Alex Majerus there, aviation analyst. I'll come back to Salma and Caroline on this. Salma, I mean, I think because I feel very close to this community, and I remember when this came this morning, and I think it is a natural instinct. My heart's on. I immediately texted my Gujarati friends saying, I really hope you haven't got family coming back from India at the moment. And this is going to affect so many people. We were saying earlier, weren't we? I mean, the Indian community, the biggest ethnic minority community in the country, and the Gujaratis make up the biggest number amongst the Indians. So there's connections to all of us watching, actually. If you go to work today, you go to school, there's going to be some sort of degrees of separation that links you to somebody involved, and it's devastating. Now, the Gujarati community say they don't want it to be about them, but inevitably this is going to impact them all, and there's going to be a lot of reflection and a lot of concern, I think, amongst them all, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think there'll be a lot of sadness. But I think, as you say, it's not just relevant for that one community, because that airline, that plane is going all around the world. So it really is an issue for all of us, not just in terms of the safety, but exactly as you said, people who are going to be travelling at the moment. In fact, I'm very scared of flying, and seeing a story like that is going to, I think, exacerbate a lot of people's anxiety. I do think what's going to be really important in the coming days is when they do have clarity on the investigation, that is as public and as prominent, so that we can understand what's happened, because the only way that we can have any kind of certainty around what's happened with either the craft or the airline or the safety protocols is being able to see what actually took place, and perhaps give some closure to the victims' and families.
We talk about Boeing, but there will be some serious questions being asked, and if I know people in India, they will not be taking this lightly. There'll be a lot of journalists who'll be talking about Air India at the moment, the airline. They don't have an amazing record. They've had a number of incidents. There was an incident in 2010 when 158 people died when the Air India Express overshot the runway in Mangalore. In 2020, another runway incident killing 21 people. They've had 3 other incidents that weren't very fatal. And actually, I have to say, and it's purely anecdotal, but Air India's got a bit of a reputation, almost a bit of a joke amongst people. I mean, it's been a subject of lots of memes, lots of viral videos. People, you often say, air conditioning's not working. I mean, at times like this, in India, the country it is, the amount of money they've got, I mean, there's serious questions to go. If your state airline has got such a poor reputation, that's seriously a concern. Yeah,
and I think in the vacuum of not knowing what's happened, and it's good to know that we're sending a team out there as well, because obviously so many of those passengers who were lost actually live here in the UK. And of course the survivor is here in the UK as well. So it's good that there's a team out there. I think one of the aspects of the aviation industry is actually often, dare I say it, there is an openness to really interrogate what's happened, because the last thing the industry needs is actually, people feeling that it's unsafe to fly. But in the vacuum of knowing what's happened here, all the things you've just said, Adil, will come into play, I'm sure, amongst many families and communities in India and here who travel regularly, who may have not had a great experience. And therefore, it's really important that the investigations are really transparent. If there are any other untoward issues that point to the airlines involved in this more comprehensively, then that has to come out as well. But first and foremost, at the moment, to be honest, whatever else has gone on with Air India is for the families concerned, for the families of the pilots as well. Don't forget all of this. Is what happened here, because they clearly saw a problem, and that's why a Mayday signal went out.
Yep. OK.
Absolutely. You just... We're in the early hours, aren't we, really, still, of all of this. Thank you so much to both of you. We'll talk to you later on in the programme as well. And
I just want to say, this is a really tough morning. And, people, the tough stories around, but it is a time when, we all come together and we think of each other at a time like this.
Yeah, absolutely.